Hello everyone. I wish you doing well. Welcome in second part. About what happened when Hitler came to power. After being able to fully consolidate his control of political power, Hitler attempted to win public support for his policies by convincing most of the German people that he would save them from the wave of economic depression that swept the world, as well as from the Treaty of Versailles, communism, and the Jewish Bolsheviks, who negatively affected the communist movement between the First and Second World Wars, as well as from the influence of other unwanted minorities. The Nazi eradicated every opposition it encountered through a process called coordination between all systems, and their merging into one system. Hitler oversaw one of the largest expansions in industrial production and civil development in Germany throughout its history. He relied on this method of floating debt and increasing the number of members of the armed forces. The Nazi policy encouraged women to stay at home to have children and take care of the home. Thus, in one of his speeches he delivered in September 1943 to the National Socialist Women's Association, Adolf Hitler said that for German women, her world must be centered around her husband, family, children and home. Hitler strengthened faith in this policy by giving him the Cross of Honor of the German Mother to honor each woman giving birth to 4 or more children. Indeed, the unemployment rate has decreased by 2 main factors: the production of weapons and the return of women to stay in their homes until men have the opportunity to obtain the jobs they were occupying. Therefore, the claim that prevailed during this period that the German economy was able to almost reach full employment is partly due, at the very least, to the ingenious propaganda used in this era. Hitler got most of the financing he used to rebuild the country and arm it from a currency manipulation policy to influence prices in the commercial markets of Hjalmar Schacht, who was the head of the German central bank in this era and responsible for the currency. The policy of tampering included the issuance of doubtful bonds, including those that were known as Mefo bills, which were additional bonds issued by the Nazi government, starting from 1934 onwards, under the cover of Metallurgische Forschung, and its name was abbreviated as Mefo. Hitler also oversaw one of the largest infrastructure development campaigns in German history. This development included the construction of many dams, the motorways and highways, as well as a number of other civil structures. Hitler's policies emphasized the importance of family life, the life in which a man seeks to earn a living, while the woman's priority is to raise children and take care of home affairs. This recovery in the fields of industry and infrastructure came at the expense of the general standard of living, at least for those who were not affected by the chronic unemployment that dominated the country during the era of the former Weimar Republic, declared in 1919 in the German city of Weimar, because wages have been reduced slightly in the years leading up to World War II, despite the increase in living expenses by 25%. Nevertheless, the workers and peasants, groups that voted for the National Socialist German Workers' Party, felt a boom in their standard of living. Hitler's government extended its sponsorship of architecture on a large scale, and Albert Speer was famous for being the first architect in the Reich government, and Speer's fame as an architect did not exceed the classic Hitler vision in which he reinterpreted German civilization except his active role as Minister of Armaments and Ammunition in recent years. For the Second World War. In 1936, Berlin hosted the Summer Olympics, which Hitler himself had opened, and its tunes were set to show the superiority of the Aryan race over all other human races, which made the games achieve mixed results. Although Hitler had planned to build an integrated network of broad railways, in German, Breitspurbahn, the outbreak of World War II led to the retreat of the completion of this mega-project. If this broad and integrated railway network had already been established, it would have been 3 meters wide, and would have vastly outpaced the old rail network established by Great Western Railway in the United Kingdom. Hitler contributed little to the design of the car that was named after the Volkswagen Beetle. Hitler assigned the car design and manufacture to Ferdinand Porsche. The production of this car was also postponed due to the outbreak of war. Hitler considered Sparta to be the first country to implement the principles of National Socialism, and praised the policy it pursued early on for eugenics, and the way in which it treated deformed offspring of children. One of the most important topics for controversy when discussing Hitler's economic policies is the dispute over Hitler's modernization issue. Some historians such as David Schonbaum and Henry Ashby Turner believe that the social and economic policies that Hitler adopted were a form of modernization intended to pursue goals against modernity. Another group of historians, especially Rainer Zitelmann, emphasized that Hitler had deliberately pursued a policy that sought the revolutionary modernization of German society. Germany emerged from the First World War with a humiliating defeat, forcing it to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which held Germany responsible for the war and forced to pay compensation to the affected, which burdened the German economy and people with a lot of financial burdens, and created a feeling of humiliation among the people and the desire to restore the lost dignity of the homeland. Politically, the defeat resulted in the fall of the Second Reich and the establishment of the Weimar Republic, which initiated a clandestine rearmament program in breach of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. The program remained limited in activity for a period until Adolf Hitler ascended the top of the power pyramid in 1933, at which time the program was given a first priority, which required the strengthening of some economic relations with some countries rich in raw materials needed by military industries such as China. The Nazi regime that preceded the Second World War also witnessed many scenes of transformation in Germany's foreign policies, for example, improving relations with Poland, despite the fact that the Treaty of Versailles deducted some German lands in favor of Poland, and then moved to annex it to Germany at the beginning of the war. Cut ties with China and signed the Axis Agreement with Japan. Entering an alliance with Italy despite its withdrawal from the German camp in World War I, which can be considered a military betrayal, which was one of the main reasons for Germany's loss of the war. February 1938, Hitler finally ended the crisis in German policy regarding the Far East, which concerned choosing between continuing the informal China-German alliance dating back to 1911 or entering into a new alliance with Japan. At this time, the military preferred Germany to continue its alliance with China. They were the Foreign Minister, Konstantin von Neurath, and the Minister of War, Werner von Blumberg. The so-called Chinese lobby supported China, and they tried to steer Germany's foreign policy away from any wars in Europe. However, Hitler dismissed the two ministers from service in the early 1938 single quotas. On the advice of Hitler's newly appointed foreign minister, strongly pro-Japanese Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler chose to end the alliance with China in order to win an alliance with the more powerful and civilized Japan. In one of his speeches to the Reichstag, Hitler spoke of Germany's recognition of the state of Manchukuo. It was a state in Manchuria that had been occupied by Japan and had nominal sovereignty over it. He abandoned German ambitions in its former colonies in the Pacific Ocean. Hitler ordered to stop sending arms shipments to China, as well as summoning all German officers who joined the Chinese army. In retaliation for Germany to end its support for China in its war against Japan, Chinese Commander-in-Chief Chiang Kai-shek cancelled the economic agreements between China and Germany. As a result, Germany was deprived of raw materials, such as tungsten, previously supplied to China. The end of the Sino-German alliance increased Germany's problems related to rearmament, as Germany is now forced to resort to the limited foreign currency reserves to purchase raw materials from the open market. In March of 1938, Hitler pressed Austria to annex it to Germany. The process of merging with Austria was called Anschluss, and this was actually done on March 14 of the same year when Hitler entered Vienna as a victor. After Austria's annexation, Hitler demanded the Czech Republic's mainly Sudeten territory. On the 3rd of March 1938, British Ambassador Neville Henderson met Hitler on behalf of his government to submit a proposal to establish an international union aimed at controlling most of the African continent, with Germany having a leadership role in this matter, in exchange for a promise from Germany not to resort to war to change borders. However, Hitler rejected the British offer, as he was more interested in expanding in Eastern Europe than in entering international federations. Hitler justified this refusal by his desire for the return of German colonies in Africa to the rule of Nazi Germany, not to enter into an international federation governing Central Africa. Moreover, Hitler considered it extremely humiliating by Britain to dictate terms for Germany regarding how to manage its affairs in Europe in exchange for a region in Africa. Hitler ended his talk with Henderson, saying he was ready to wait 20 years for the restoration of German colonies in Africa to accept Britain's special terms of avoiding war. Moreover, On March 29, 1938, Hitler held a series of secret meetings in Berlin with Konrad Heinlein, leader of the Home Front Party, German Heimfront, and is the largest German ethnic party in the Sudetenland. During these meetings, it was agreed that Heinlein would provide a pretext for Germany to invade Czechoslovakia, which is to demand that Germans in the Sudetenland region the Prague government for their right to self-government, a demand that the government is unlikely to uphold. In April 1938, Heinlein told Hungary's foreign minister that no matter how generous the Czech government offers, he will continue to increase demands, to spoil any means of understanding because that is the only way to quickly destroy Czechoslovakia. Undeclaredly, the issue of the Sudetenland region was not of great importance to Hitler, but his real intentions were to use this issue as a justification within and outside the country to wage war on Czechoslovakia and destroy it out of the right of the people of this region to determine their fate and the Prague government's refusal to meet the demands of Heinlein. Hitler planned for the need for massive military reinforcements on the Czech border, and for launching fierce propaganda attacks talking about the persecution of the Germans in this region. Finally, to illuminate a set of incidents between Home Front activists and the Czech authorities with the aim of justifying the invasion that will swiftly invade Czechoslovakia in a campaign that takes a few days before other powers can intervene. Since Hitler wanted to reap the most fruits and complete what he called the Western Wall to protect the Rhineland region, he chose to invade in late September or early October 1938. In April 1938, Hitler ordered the High Command of the Armed Forces to prepare for the takeover plan for Czechoslovakia, which he called a strategic plan for the invasion of Czechoslovakia, in German, Vollgrund. The May Crisis, which lasted between the 19th and 22nd of May in 1938, was one of the factors that increased tension in Europe. The May Crisis of 1938 was a false alarm by rumors warning that Czechoslovakia would be invaded at the end of the week in which the country's local elections would take place, as well as erroneous reports of dangerous movements of German armies along the Czech border just before the elections. Other factors that confirmed this were the Czech police killing of 2 ethnic Germans and Ribbentrop's hints of violence to Henderson when the latter asked him about the authenticity of the news of a weekend invasion. This has led to Czechoslovakia partial mobilization and London issuing strict warnings of the German invasion of Czechoslovakia at the end of the week, before realizing that these rumors are not true and that there is no German invasion at the end of this week. Although no invasion was planned for May 1938, some in London believed that Berlin was inevitably considering this, which led to 2 warnings on the 21st and 22nd of March that the United Kingdom was ready to go to war to Germany's side in case of France going to war against Germany. For his part, Hitler used the words of one of his officer's aides and expressed his feeling of outrage over his having to retreat after the mobilization process carried out by Czechoslovakia and after the warnings of both London and Paris, although he had not planned for the invasion this weekend. Although a draft invasion plan was already drawn up in April 1938 to invade Czechoslovakia in the near future, the May Crisis and the idea of a diplomatic defeat added to Hitler's conviction that the path he had chosen was correct. The May Crisis seemed to have persuaded Hitler of the difficulty of expansion without Britain's support, and that expansion against Britain was the only viable approach at that time. One of the direct results of the May Crisis is that Hitler has issued orders to accelerate the pace in the marine construction industry beyond the stipulated in the Maritime Treaty between Britain and Germany. It first came to the memo known as High Memorandum, which was issued on the orders of Hitler. Then the British Royal Fleet was the main enemy of the German Navy. Moreover, Hitler declared at the conference on May 28, 1938 that his decision to crush Czechoslovakia by October 1 of the same year was unchangeable. His justification for this was that this method would be believed by the eastern wing of the army so that it could crawl to the west in England and France. At the same conference, Hitler expressed his firm belief that Britain would not risk a war until after the completion of the rearmament process that Hitler believed would take place between 1941 and 1942. Germany should dispose of France and its allies in Europe between 1938 and 1941, during which time German rearmament will still be carried out. Hitler's intense insistence on the implementation of the Vollgrund plan in 1938 sparked a serious crisis within the leadership structure in Germany. In a lengthy series of notes he submitted to the Chief of Staff, General Ludwig Beck, that the Fall-Grün plan that would spark a world war was being lost by Germany. He also urged Hitler to abandon the idea of war he was planning. As for Hitler, he saw Beck's anti-war views as childish accounts. Beginning in August 1938, news arrived in London stating that Germany had started to move reserve soldiers. Some news was also leaked by elements opposed to the war in the German army that the war would flare up sometime in September. Finally, as a result of intense diplomatic pressure from France and Britain in particular, the Czech president, Edvard Benes, revealed on September 5, 1938 what he called the Fourth Plan for his country's constitutional reorganization, in which he met most of the Germans' demands in the Sudetenland region, which related to the autonomy that Henlein made in his speech in the Carlsbad region, German, April 1938. The Czech president also stated that he would avoid all pretexts so as not to give the Germans the opportunity to invade his country. And soon the response of the Home Front party led by Henlein came to this to present the Fourth Plan by provoking a series of violent clashes with the Czech police, which reached its climax in mid-September, which led to the declaration of martial law in certain areas in the Sudetenland. And in response to this critical situation, the Prime Minister thought British Neville Chamberlain, in the asylum of the plan that was called Plan Z, which requires him to travel to Germany and meet Hitler to reach an agreement working to end the crisis. On September 13, 1938, Chamberlain made an offer to travel to Germany to discuss a solution to this crisis. Thus, the Prime Minister decided to implement the Plan G in response to the erroneous information released by the German opposition, which warns that the German invasion is expected at any time after the 18th of September of the same year. Although Hitler was dissatisfied with Chamberlain's offer, he agreed to meet the Prime Minister, because his rejection of this offer would lie to his repeated allegations that he was a man of peace who only pushed him to war other than the stubbornness of Czech President Benes. During the summit in Berchtesgaden, Chamberlain promised to pressure Benes to agree to Hitler's stated demands regarding the conversion of the Sudetenland region to Germany in exchange for Hitler's reluctantly promise to delay any military response, so that Chamberlain could have an opportunity. Levy keeps his promise. Hitler would have agreed to this postponement only to confirm that Chamberlain had failed to obtain the approval of the Prague government to transfer the Sudetenland dependency. Therefore, he was very disappointed when the British and French pressure succeeded in her endeavors, and the Prague government made him answer his request. The difficulty of the talks in September 1938 between Hitler and Chamberlain was made more difficult by the differing perceptions inherent in their respective views regarding the form the European map should take. Hitler was aiming to invoke the Sudetenland problem to ignite the war, while Chamberlain was struggling to find a peaceful solution to the problem. When Chamberlain returned to Germany on September 22 of the same year to present the peace plan of transferring the Sudetenland dependency to Germany at a summit with Hitler in Bad Godesberg, German, Bad Godesberg, the British delegation authorized to negotiate was surprised by Hitler's refusal to implement the conditions set by himself in Berchtesgaden. In order to permanently eliminate peace efforts by Chamberlain, Hitler demanded that Czechoslovakia completely abandon the Sudetenland no later than the 28th of September in 1938, and without negotiations between Prague and Berlin, and without an international mandate to monitor the dependency transfer process. Besides, Hitler demanded that no public referendums be held in the regions whose dependencies would be transferred to Germany before the completion of the process. Hitler added that Germany would not give up the option of war until after Czechoslovakia reached solutions to Poland's and Hungary's claims against it. The extent of divergence of views between Hitler and Chamberlain was evident when the latter became acquainted with the new demands of the former and protested against the warning tone that characterized these demands, which prompted Hitler to respond with the opposite argument that, given that the document written about his demands is titled a memo, this means it is not a warning. On September 25, 1938, Britain rejected the Bad Godesberg ultimatum and began preparing for war. To underscore this point, Sir Horace Wilson, the first industrial advisor to the British government, and close aide to Chamberlain, Hitler visited as messenger to tell him that in the event of Germany's attack on Czechoslovakia, France would implement its commitment to the alliance between Czechoslovakia and France that was concluded in 1924. Then England will find itself obligated to offer assistance to France. On September 27 and 28, and in his insistence on launching the attack scheduled for October 1, 1938, Hitler rethinked what he intended to do and agreed to a proposal made by Mussolini and brokered his acceptance of a conference in Munich attended by Chaplin, Mussolini, and French Prime Minister Édouard Glady to discuss the situation in Czechoslovakia. 85. The reasons why Hitler changed his position are not clear, but it seems that these reasons lie in the union of the British and French warnings on the same idea, especially after the British fleet has already moved, which made Hitler finally see the result of the Fall Grund plan. He also appeared as the aggressor as a result of the nature of the statements that could be a pretext for the outbreak of war, which he announced when he was calling for the conversion of the Sudetenland dependency, along with the opinions of his German advisors that Germany was not ready to enter into a world war in both military and economic terms. Also, there were those warnings he had received from some countries that he was seen as his allies, and that included Italy, Japan, Poland and Hungary, in which he stated that they would not fight on behalf of Germany. Finally, there were quite clear indications that the majority of the German people were dissatisfied with the idea of war in general. In addition, Germany was suffering from a lack of adequate supplies of oil and other essential raw materials, because the factories that were to produce industrial oil for use in the German war effort were not yet operational, and the dependence was largely on imports from abroad. The German naval forces also declared that if they enter a war with Britain, they will not be able to breach the British blockade. And because Germany had almost no reserves of oil, this reason alone was sufficient for its loss of war. The Ministry of Economy also told Hitler that Germany possesses only 2.6 million tons of oil at the present time, and that entering a war against Britain and France requires at least 7.6 million tons of oil. Since September 18, 1938, Britain has refused to supply the Reich with minerals, and on September 24, the British Royal Navy has prevented British ships from sailing to Germany. Britain has detained the Invershannon tanker carrying 8,600 tons of oil to Hamburg, Germany, which has had direct economic negative impacts on Germany. 88. And bearing in mind that Germany was dependent on importing oil, as 80% of oil in Germany during the 30s of the 20th century was coming to it from the continents of the New World, in addition to the possibility that Germany would enter a war with Britain would have placed it in a blockade that cuts off from it the oil supply you need. Historians see Hitler's decision to find a peaceful solution and cancel the Fall Grund plan due to Hitler's concerns about the oil problem. At the one-day conference, which was held in Munich and attended by Hitler, Chamberlain, Daladier and Mussolini, the Munich Treaty was signed that responded to Hitler's apparent requests and transferred the dependency of the regions in Sudetenland to Germany. Since London and Paris had already agreed to the idea of transferring the dependency of the disputed region in mid-September, the conference covered in one-day talks on technical issues related to how to implement the transfer of dependency. The conference also discussed Hitler's simple concessions, which is that the dependency transfer process takes place within 10 days in October with an international mandate overseeing the dependency transfer process, and Germany will wait until the Hungarian and Polish allegations are settled. At the conclusion of the conference, Hitler signed the German-British Friendship Treaty, on which Chamberlain pinned great hopes, while Hitler's treaty had no significance. And although Chamberlain was satisfied with the Munich conference, which led to his false claim that this conference guaranteed peace at the moment, Hitler was very angry that he had to abandon the war he was aiming to launch in 1938. As a result of the summit, Hitler won the Time magazine referendum in the year 1938. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain welcomed this treaty as a peace initiative for the time being, but as they sought to win Hitler and win his favor, France and Britain left Czechoslovakia at the mercy of Hitler. 89. Although Hitler had publicly announced his overwhelming happiness following the fulfillment of his apparent demands, he had secretly resolved to enter a war the next time that he was able to do so to ensure that Germany's future demands were obtained. 95. From his point of view, Hitler saw that the peace initiative brokered by Britain was a diplomatic defeat for Germany, although it heavily served Germany's apparent demands, because it proved that his dreams of expansion in the East would only be fulfilled by eliminating Britain's power. 96. In the wake of the Munich Treaty, Hitler felt that since Britain would not ally with Germany or remain neutral, allowing Germany to realize its ambitions on the European continent, it had become a major threat to Germany. Thus, Britain replaced the Soviet Union in his mind as the main enemy of the Reich from Hitler's point of view, which necessitated the reorientation of German politics. In November 1938, Hitler stated in one of his secret speeches before a group of German journalists that he was coerced into talking about peace as the goal he sought in order to be able to reach the level of rearmament which was considered a necessary requirement for the stage coming. In the same speech, Hitler expressed his grumbling that the peace propaganda he launched in the previous 5 years had achieved great success, and it was now time for him to come up with the idea of promoting the war on the German people. Hitler explained that practical experience has demonstrated that the propaganda that promoted peace in the past decade was a risky idea, because it is so easy to convince the people that the current government abides by its decision and intentions to preserve peace under all circumstances. Instead, Hitler called for a new type of journalism that has the responsibility to present certain facts in foreign policy in a manner that causes the voice of the people themselves to loudly chant the need to start using force. Later in November 1938, Hitler expressed the disappointment he felt from the cautious advice he was receiving from some quarters. Hitler called economist Karl Friedrich Godler, General Ludwig Beck, Dr. Helmar Schacht, diplomat Ulrich von Hassel and economist Radolf Brinkmann the name circles of careful thought too much. It was Hitler's need for their skills that prevented him from getting rid of them one day or doing something like that. In late 1938 and the beginnings of 1939, the ongoing economic crisis caused by the problems of the rearmament process, especially that related to the shortage of hard currencies that Germany needed to purchase the raw materials that it was lacking, in addition to the reports received from Göring about the impossibility of implementing the timetable. Hitler's 4-year plan is scheduled until he is forced in January 1939 to reluctantly issue an order stating the reduction of the stakes of materials that bind the defense force, so that the share of steel is reduced by 30%, aluminum by 47%, and cement by 25%, rubber by 14%, and copper by 20%. On January 30, 1939, Hitler gave a speech entitled Exports or Death, calling for the building of a German offensive economy or battle of the exports, as Hitler called it, in order to increase Germany's foreign currency that it needs to purchase raw materials such as high-quality iron needed for military materials. This speech was also known as the prophetic speech. The name by which this speech was known comes from Hitler's prophecy that he made in the last part of his speech. There is one thing I would like to say on this day, and I would like it to be engraved in the memory of others and in our memories, we Germans. Over the course of my life, the circumstances often allowed me to foresee some things that others mocked me when I stated them. During my struggle to gain power, the Jews were the first to meet my prophecy with a degree of irony, especially when I stated that I will take over the leadership of the state one day, and the leadership of the entire nation. And that I will then be able to settle the problem of the Jews and do many other things. Their laughter was loud, but I suspect that they have been mocking for a long time that should not be ridiculed. Today let me tell you one of my prophecies again. If the Jewish financial powers outside Europe succeeded in bringing the nations back into a new world war, the result would not be the Bolshevik supremacy all over the land, and thus the Jews would achieve victory, but rather the destruction of the Jewish race in Europe. In Hitler's view, there was an imperative, in terms of his anti-British approach, to annexing Poland to Germany as a satellite state or even a neutral country in this conflict. Hitler believed that achieving this is a necessity on the strategic level on the one hand, because it guarantees securing the eastern side of the Reich, and on the economic level on the other hand to avoid the negative impact of the British blockade. Germany's ambition was primarily to transform Poland into a state of its own. But by March 1939, and when Poland rejected German demands 3 times, Hitler decided to destroy Poland in implementation of the main objective of Germany's foreign policy in 1939. On April 3, 1939, Hitler ordered his military to begin preparing for the scheme known as the invasion of Poland, German We Fall, a scheme that required the German invasion to take place on August 25, 1939. In August 1939, Hitler spoke with his commanders. The military on his 1939 master plan said, establish an acceptable relationship between Germany and Poland in order to fight the West. But given that the Poles would not accept cooperation with Germany in order to establish an acceptable relationship, meaning that they agreed that Poland would become a German state, Hitler held that there would be no alternative to erasing Poland from existence. historian Gerhard Weinberg explained that the Hitler people included a group that believed in the idea of destroying Poland. Anti-Polish sentiments were very strong in the German army, but they were less satisfied with the idea of entering into a war with Britain and France. If this was the price Germany would have to pay to destroy Poland, Hitler would have probably succeeded by his plan to express what his people wanted. In his private discussions with his aides, Hitler always described Britain as the primary enemy of Germany to be defeated. From his point of view, wiping Poland out of existence was a necessary prelude that must take place in order for him to achieve the goal he is seeking to secure the eastern side of his country and to add more to the vital area of Germany. On June 22, 1941, 3 million German troops attacked the Soviet Union, striking at the non-aggression treaty that Hitler signed with Stalin 2 years ago. One of the reasons why Hitler invaded the Soviet Union was one of the topics of great historical controversy. Ramsey has been given this name, Operation Barbarossa. Some historians such as Andreas Hallgruber have stated that this process was only a phased step within Hitler's plan, dubbed Stufenplan, which was aimed at subjugating the world. Hallgruber believes that Hitler developed this plan in the 1920s. On the other hand, other historians such as John Lukács see that Hitler had never had a phased plan to subjugate the world, and that the invasion of the Soviet Union was a step made by Hitler for a specific purpose after Britain refused to surrender. Lukács stated that the reason Hitler had stated in a private interview to invade the Soviet Union was precisely that Winston Churchill had pinned hope on the Soviet Union's participation in the war alongside the Allied forces. And then Hitler found that the only way he could compel Britain to surrender is the elimination of this hope. This was the real reason why Hitler carried out this operation. From Lukács's view, the invasion of the Soviet Union was in this sense a step essentially taken by Hitler against Britain to compel her to seek peace with him by destroying her only hope of victory, and this step was not, in fact, against the Soviet Union. Klaus Hildebrand believed that both Stalin and Hitler were planning a separate attack on the other in 1941. Hildebrand also believes that the news that circulated in the spring of 1941 about the massing of Soviet forces on the border led to Hitler's involvement in the plan to flee forward, in German, Flucht nach vorn, meaning to confront danger by attack rather than withdrawal. There is another class of historians that includes a diverse group of them. Victor Suvorov, Joachim Hoffmann, Ernst Nolte, and David Irving believe that the official reason stated by the Germans for their invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 is the actual reason behind this process. Thus this process is a preventive war. Hitler found himself forced to engage in it to avoid a Soviet attack that would have prevented him from achieving his dreams. That attack that was to take place in July 1941. This theory was subjected to a major attack and was described as wrong. American historian Gerhard Weinberg likened the defenders of the theory preventive war believe in fairy tales. In their invasion, German forces seized large parts of the territories that included the Baltic states, Belarus, and Ukraine. Likewise, many of the Soviet forces surrounded and destroyed the Soviet forces, which Stalin had instructed not to withdraw. Despite this, German forces found themselves forced to stop just before they were able to enter Moscow. In December 1941, due to the harsh Russian winter and violent Soviet resistance, the failure to achieve the quick victory that Hitler wanted. On December 18, 1941, Heinrich Himmler of the Reichsfuhrer SS ranks in the Nazi elite units in the notebook in which he records the details of the interviews he conducts to Hitler. What shall we do with the Jews of Russia? Hitler's answer to the question was, Auspartisan and ausrotten, or exterminate them as members of the irregular forces that disturbed the occupying German forces by launching repeated raids on them. The Israeli historian Yehuda Bauer comments on this topic that the note that Himmler recorded over a period of time can be considered the most powerful evidence that can be found to prove Hitler's explicit order to establish the Holocaust. Hitler's declaration of war was placed on the United States on December 11, 1941, 4 days after the Japanese Empire attacked the Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and 6 days after Nazi German forces approached Moscow in the face of a coalition that included the world's largest empire represented in the British Empire. The largest industrial and financial power in the world is represented in the United States, and the largest army in the world is represented in the Soviet Union. In late 1942, German forces were defeated in the Second Battle of El Alamein, which put an end to Hitler's attempt to seize the Suez Canal in the Middle East. In February 1943, the colossal Battle of Stalingrad ended with the destruction of the German Sixth Army. After that, there were the massive Battle of Kursk. Hitler's military decisions became increasingly eccentric, and the military and economic situation of Germany was deteriorating. Hitler's health also deteriorated. It was his left hand trembling. Ian Kershaw, who wrote the autobiography of Hitler and others, believed that Hitler may have suffered from Parkinson's disease. 146. Syphilis is also suspected to be the cause of some of the pathogenetic symptoms that appeared on Hitler, although the evidence for this belief is weak. The invasion of Sicily by the Allied forces marked the operation of Husky. In 1943, Mussolini was deposed by Pietro Badoglio, who announced his surrender to the Allied forces. Throughout 1943 and 1944, Soviet forces forced Hitler's armies to withdraw consistently along the Eastern Front. On June 6, 1944, the operation of the armies of the Western Allies was carried out in northern France in one of the largest amphibious operations in the history of the military, a process known as Operation Overlord. Realists in the German army knew that defeat was inevitable, and some of them planned to remove Hitler from power. In July 1944, Klaus von Stauffenberg planted a bomb at the Führer-Hitler command center known as the Wolfwache, German, Wolfschanze, in Rustenburg, German, Rastenburg, but Hitler narrowly escaped death. Hitler ordered him to carry out a brutal reprisal in which the death sentence was carried out in more than 4,900 people. This is sometimes caused by starvation and solitary confinement, followed by slow exposure to suffocation. The main resistance movement was eliminated, although some smaller dispersed groups continued their attempts. By the end of 1944, the Red Army had forced the Germans to retreat to Central Europe, and the Western Allied forces were advancing towards Germany. Hitler realized that Germany had lost the war, but he did not allow withdrawal. Hitler hoped to negotiate unilaterally for peace with the Americans and the British, a hope that was supported by the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt on the 12th of April of the year. Hitler's stubbornness and irreverence allowed taking military realities into account as the Holocaust continued. Hitler also issued orders to completely destroy all German industrial infrastructure before it fell into the hands of the Allied forces. He said that Germany's failure to win the war resulted in it losing its right to survive. Thus, Hitler decided that the entire nation should end up with him. Hitler entrusted the implementation of the Scorched Earth Plan, destroying everything that could benefit the enemy before withdrawing from the land, to the Minister of Armaments Albert Speer, who did not obey the command of his commander. In April 1945, Soviet forces attacked the outskirts of Berlin. Hitler found himself in a situation in which his pursuers forced him to flee to the mountains of Bavaria so that he could confront them on a final round in the national stronghold, where the remaining remnants of the forces had taken refuge. But Hitler was determined to live or perish in the capital of his country. On April 22, during one of his recent military conferences, Hitler boycotted the report he was reciting to ask about the fate of General Steiner's offensive plan. The response was a period of long silence that overshadowed the meeting. Afterwards, they told him that the attack had not been carried out and that the withdrawal of many units of the Steiner army from Berlin, on Hitler's orders, had led to a weakening of the front and thus the Russians' success in entering Berlin. Then Hitler asked all of those present, except for Wilhelm Keitel, Hans Krebs, Alfred Jodl, Wilhelm Bergdorf and Martin Bormann, to leave the conference room. Then it exploded in the remaining attendees with an elaborate and violent sermon denouncing what he considered deliberate betrayal of his orders and inefficiency on the part of its leaders. He concluded by swearing that he would remain in Berlin at the head of the forces defending the city, and then shoot himself. And before that day ended, Hitler found that the only way to escape was to implement a new plan that would enlist the help of the 12th Army, led by General Walter Fink. The plan required that Fink divert his army, which was confronting American forces in the west at the time, to the east to liberate Berlin. Thus, the 12th Army joined forces with the 9th Army to storm the city. Fink had already attacked, and in the chaos he was able to make temporary contact with the Potsdam garrison. However, He never managed to contact the Ninth Army, as originally planned in the plan. On April 23, Joseph Goebbels made the following statement to the Berliners. Adolf Hitler invite you to fight for your city. Fight with all your strength, for the sake of your wives, children, mothers and fathers. Your weapons defend everything that is dear to you, they defend the generations that will succeed us. Be brave and dear. Be creative and cunning. Glitter between you. He will remain with his companions with you. The wife and children with you, too. Whoever controlled the city with only 200 men, today will use every means to empower the city's defenses. The Battle of Berlin must be a signal to the whole nation in order to rise and fight. On April 30, 1945, after violent clashes, she moved from street to street in the city of Berlin, and while the Soviet forces were at an intersection or two from the headquarters of the Reich Chancellery, Hitler committed suicide by shooting his mouth while placing a cyanide capsule in his mouth. Hitler's body and Eva Braun's body, his mistress whom he married the day before his suicide, were placed in a pit made by a bomb. Otto Junsch and some of the auxiliary officers in the basement of the commander poured a lot of gasoline on the two bodies, setting them on fire while the Red Army was continuing to raid the city with bombs. In the 2nd of May, Berlin surrendered. In the years after the war, information and reports about the fate of the remaining Hitler remains was conflicting. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union, information was received from reports held in the Soviet archive that the bodies of Hitler, Eva Braun, Joseph Goebbels, his wife Magda Goebbels, the 6 Goebbels children, General Hans Krebs and the dogs that Hitler had secretly owned in the cemeteries near Rathenau in German, Rathenau in Brandenburg, German, Brandenburg. In 1970, the Soviets opened the cemetery where they were buried, and the remains where they were found and scattered in the Elbe River were burned. According to information received from the Russian Federal Security Service, part of the human skull was preserved in the archive of the device and displayed in a gallery in 2000. It is one of the remains that remain of Hitler's body and considers all the remains of this remains. Many historians and researchers have questioned the fact that this part of the skull belonged to Hitler's remains. Thanks for watching. Goodbye my friends.